Hey, I want to take a moment and welcome you. Welcome you to the third day of TLC. My name is Stephanie Heald, and I am an assistant professor at the University of Arizona Global Campus. And I am going to be the host for today's session, Perspective is Subjective, our relative inability to objectively evaluate people, places, and things. By joining us today, you acknowledge that this session is being recorded and will be shared with TLC-related materials. Microphones will be muted for this presentation, but we encourage you to post questions and comments in the chat. We have enabled live transcription, so if you would like to use this, click the live transcription button at the bottom of your Zoom window. I am pleased to be able to introduce our presenter, Dr. Sherry Swartz, today. Dr. Swartz is a criminal behavior expert who serves as a faculty lead of the bachelor and master's programs in criminal justice at the University of Arizona Global Campus. Dr. Swartz has authored and edited multiple college textbooks on criminal behavior and the intersection of psychology and law. She continues to conduct criminal behavior research, as well as factors on student learning that impact student learning, engagement, and retention. She is a frequently invited guest expert on the National Crime Stories with Nancy Grace, and also an invited lecturer on issues regarding criminal behavior, the death penalty, the victim advocacy, and several other related topics. Without further ado, I am pleased and honored to turn the microphone over to Dr. Swartz. Dr. Swartz, you are muted.
Oh, so sorry. I thought I was going to make this smooth intro. So there goes that, right? So what I'm going to talk to you all about today is something that seems common sense. I hear this in conversation all the time. I've said it a bunch myself, like everybody sees things a little bit differently, and we see things through our lens. But do we really stop and think about what that means and how seeing things through our lens might impact other people? So I wanted to take a bit of a deep dive into that today because while no, it's not criminal behavior, which is my primary training and expertise, this relates to and how we deal with our students, how we deal with our colleagues, how we deal with other people in everyday life. And it's a process that I continually go through, and I wanted to share that with you all today. So these are the main points that I'll talk about today: how inherent subjectivity in our perceptions influences our decision-making, and how recognizing and minimizing the impact of what I call stuff, our own stuff, which are triggers, as potential barriers to equity and inclusion, and frankly, to empathy, and valuing others' lived experiences with an eye toward equity and inclusion, and approaching first with empathy. So I'm going to share with you a disclaimer that I've been at this. I joke and say that I'm 29 years old. I think you all can tell that that's not true. And so I've been at this for a while. This is the curious case of instructor versus student. It's a true case, but it happened many years ago in a different state at another university entirely. So you won't figure out who it is. I'm sure of that. All right. So this is a situation where a student she had some family issues. She had a death in her family. Actually, she had a series of deaths in her family. And not during that particular class. It had happened a little before she started the class, but it was still impacting her, as I'm sure you can all imagine. And, I got a complaint, and so I followed up with the instructor to find out what really happened, because of course the complaint that I got from the student, I thought, wow, is that what was really said? So I followed up with the instructor. I didn't want to be judgmental at first, and this is just some excerpts from the response that I got, right? That the instructor felt like, hey, I worked with the student throughout the course. She's had excuse after excuse. She's complaining about the late penalty, because I deducted a 10% late penalty, and the student didn't ask her for an extension. These are things that the instructor's saying. The paper just wasn't a quality submission in the instructor's point of view. And the instructor felt that she was being very generous with the grading already. And she said, I know it seems I'm not sympathetic to her situation, but I was, and I gave her numerous extensions and I worked with her, and she didn't ask for or need extensions for anything. So the instructor feels like, hey, I've gone above and beyond here. The student didn't hold up her part. She says here, I did not ask to confirm the deaths, so I'm not sure if they happened. And parenthetically says, of course, I give the benefit of the doubt. So as you guys can imagine, and I don't have to read to you, you can read. My heart stopped a little bit when I read that. And, for a couple of reasons. One, because I recognize sort of the compassion fatigue, and that this is something we hear frequently as instructors of courses. People do pass away, right? And yes, there are undoubtedly students who will say people passed away that didn't pass away. But so my heart stopped because I thought, wow, that's not really coming from a very nice place of empathy. You're kind of telling me what your approach was, that you didn't really believe the student. And I also thought, I've been in this position myself a time or two where I kind of, I roll, not of course in front of the student, but where I'm thinking, okay, well, maybe it's true, maybe it's not, here we go again, that sort of thing. And so I thought, okay, this is a topic I want to tackle. I really want to see how this impacts how I'm coming across to students, and how do I pass along to faculty how to gauge this within ourselves and figure out how we're coming across. So I want to ask a question. So if you guys can pop into the chat, my question is, how many of you read this and you think the instructor is a horribly mean person? You can, just say yes or not. I'm just curious. And while you're doing that, I will continue on, right? So we're talking about subjectivity versus objectivity, right? So this is a philosophical difference, really, but it is one of the most widely recognized in research topics in psychology. And of course, as you all know, subjectivity, a person's perspective, their opinion, feelings, beliefs, desires, right? It's an unsubstantiated personal opinion rather than evidence-based fact. And it's an extremely important qualifier of our human experience, right? Objectivity, of course, this is our reliance on science, scientific method, sound data comes from a credible source. It's been subject to the rigors of peer review, right? Undistorted by emotion or personal bias in a perfect world. And so as much as we like to believe that we are and can be objective, for humans, this is a tall order. This is a tall order, right? And so what's the dirty word for subjectivity? Bias. We don't like that word. No one wants to believe that we're biased. But the evidence shows that we are in fact biased, and that doesn't make us bad people. It makes us normal people, right? So the bias blind spot, Dr. Emily Pronin from Princeton University, she says people accept that biases exist in others, but tend to deny that they themselves are biased, right? Or I say we accept that we're biased, right? This is my experience. I accept that I'm biased, but I can, it's self-preservation in a way to say, yes, I'm biased, but it doesn't really have an impact on the way I treat other people, which is short-sighted. It's not accurate, right? So correspondence bias, you may know it by the fundamental attribution error. And I like to present it really simply like this. If you've ever driven on an interstate and you've been cut off, you might have some choice words for the person that cut you off, right? And it's usually, if you're me and you're in my car, I won't share any of those words here today, but I'm usually referring to the other person as something inherently wrong with them. They're an idiot, they're stupid, they're rude, they're ignorant, whatever. And, some other colorful words that go with that. And then, of course, if I cut somebody off, I attribute it more to the situation. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't see them. that sort of thing. Right? So that's kind of how fundamental attribution error works. When we attribute people's objectively bad behavior, right, or undesirable behavior to something about their disposition, their character, their personality, instead of evaluating the situational factors. Right. So let's take a look here again at the email. Right. So I did not ask to confirm the deaths, so I'm not sure if they happened. Right. I gave her the benefit of the doubt. The student didn't even put forth the effort to complete a full paper. Right. So here, fundamental attribution bias, fundamental attribution error. The instructor has decided that the student's a liar. Right. Because that's really what this says here. Right. I'm not sure if they happened. She could be lying. And in context of the rest of the message, it seems like the instructor felt like the student was making things up. The student didn't even put forth the effort to complete a full paper, right? So now the student is lazy or incompetent, those sort of things. And she just wants something, right? All she wants is the late penalty waived. Right? This student has been frustrating from the start. So now something about the student's character, right? And their disposition, frustrating, right? Fundamental attribution error. So what is the instructor's stuff? So the instructor did not recognize her own stuff, her own bias, right? And when we talked, she rejected the idea that her stuff impacted her judgment and treatment of the student. She begrudgingly accepted that she may have been triggered by, these deaths in the family and this idea that maybe it's not true, because she's heard that excuse so many times over her long career. But she believed that didn't matter because she was generous toward the student anyway. Perspective is subjective. I didn't see it that way, and neither did the student, right? And again, my perspective is probably subjective. For sure, the student's was as well. So how do we reduce the impact of subjective judgment? Well, what the research shows is that we can do these 4 things. 1, engage in perspective taking. Really important. I'm going to talk more about that. This allows for expansion of our own perspective. If I put myself in the place of my student, then I can expand my own perspective, right? Now I'm not just looking at the situation from how I see it. I'm looking at the situation from how the student is approaching it and what might be going on with them. This builds empathy. It also enhances our own personal growth. And again, this is not me preaching. I hope it's not coming across like that, because that's not the point here. These are things that I've learned because I made an effort, and it's a continuous effort. It's not effortless. It's not something that it's second nature. It gets easier, but it is something that requires constant reminders and constant self-checking in. So perspective taking, first order business. When you get that email from that student, or that student approaches you, or any person, identify if you're feeling triggered, if your heart starts to beat a little bit faster, if you're automatically going into the eye roll where you're like, here we go again. Be mindful of that. That is your cue for yourself that you might be responding to this situation in a subjective manner. Emotional triggers typically result when we feel our own needs aren't being met, right? So needs of an instructor in a classroom, perhaps feeling respected, feeling liked, understood, valued, treated fairly, to be correct. We like to be right. We want to be in control. We want to be independent, right? Also appreciate that your own perspective, don't assume that you're wrong or bad, but figure out how it was formed, right? Recognize the subjectivity in it. It's not about beating yourself up. It's about saying, okay, I'm human. So what's going on here? Why am I feeling this way? Am I really being fair? How does the student see it? Right? How might they see it? Let me try to consider it from where they are standing. Allow the other person to lead. Seek first to understand, then to be understood. These are powerful words to say to someone, I understand, but it has to be genuine, right? So really try to get to that place of understanding and use your own lens to support empathize, provide a unique and expanded perspective for them. Be 100% present. So important. I can't overestimate this. You have to be 100% present when someone is sharing something with you. Listen with undivided attention. Listen with your intuition. Listen with awareness. Most of all, listen with respect. So in this particular situation, even if the instructor thought there's a chance I could be lied to, give equal weight to, there's a chance I'm not being lied to, and that this person is really struggling, right? Perspective taking to stop judging others, monitor your thoughts about other people, right? That idea that this student is frustrating, that is something you need to be aware of. If this is what's on your mind, those sorts of things, monitor those thoughts. Try to figure out where they're coming from. Are they positive? Are they negative? And what bearing do these types of judgments have on how you're treating this person and what the outcome is going to be for them? Reverse the fundamental attribution error, flip it. Awareness of this is critical. And, you know, I drive on the interstate here in Miami all the time. Oh boy, is that an adventure. And so I get cut off a lot. I probably cut people off a lot too, unintentionally, but it's kind of, you know, how you drive around here. And so I laugh at myself now when I start to go into that, oh, this ignoramus, right? And I kind of laugh at myself and I say, okay, I can't escape the human condition because I'm a human, but now I'm aware that who knows, maybe they didn't see me, right? No one crashed, so it's all good. Let's all move on with our day. And avoid stereotyping. This is so important. It's so easy. It's a cognitive shortcut. So we do tend to stereotype. And I'm talking about the stereotype of the student, right? Which, you know, I've been doing this for a little bit, and a lot of times, not so much at UAGC, I have to say that I haven't encountered this really at UAGC, but at other places, I have encountered that student stereotype, that they're lazy, that they're just constantly trying to get out of doing work, things like that, right? So avoid those stereotypes, be aware of them, and fight to overcome them. Nothing good ever comes from stereotyping. It just doesn't. And if all else fails, you still think the student's lying to you, you're still frustrated by the student, turn to empathy. Turn to empathy. It's the key. For yourself, check in and remember, how does it feel to be judged and to be in touch with those negative feelings, right? We've all been judged, and we've all become aware at some point that we were judged, and probably unfairly judged due to the fundamental attribution error. It's not a good feeling. It doesn't feel good to be judged. And sometimes it feels like no matter what you say to try to prove that you're, you know, not lying or trying to get away with something, and you're not a lazy person or whatever other negative judgment someone has had, you know, it just seems like you're spinning your wheels and not getting anywhere. So be in touch with that. It's not a good feeling to be judged, right? Empathy and understanding are key elements. These bring about equity and inclusion. They do, because when you can empathize, even if you've never had the same experience that that particular person has had, even if you have some doubts that that's really what happened and you believe that that's just their perspective, their subjective perspective, it doesn't matter. Empathize. Accept that that is how they feel, and they are entitled to feel how they feel, and approach them with that culture of care. I don't know what you're going through. I can only imagine. I can see, or I can, you know, read in your email that it sounds like you're not having a good time. And I'm sorry to hear that, and mean it. Because when you empathize and you show that culture of care, you benefit, right? When you show deep empathy toward others, their defensive energy goes down and positive energy replaces it. And that's when you can get more creative in solving problems. And that is my talk. Thank you all so much for attending. Let me see what people said in the chat about the instructor. Oh, see, you all have empathy, 50-50, but the benefit or winning hand goes to the professor. Makes me curious why the instructor responded the way they did. Yeah. Yeah. Yes, Vanessa, thank you for empathizing with me and validating my road rage. I appreciate that. Diana says, suspend your assumptions and prejudices. Very important. Yay, Ted, 100% present. Listen with respect, turn to empathy. Thanks, Ted. Anything else that you guys want to share? Anything else? Thanks, Kara. Yeah, I mean, it's a constant, and I hope I didn't sound like I was preaching to you all, because that certainly is not my intent. I'm in the trenches too. And the bottom line is that it's a constant process for me too. I remind myself on a regular basis. As far as this instructor goes, she was an excellent instructor. It was very out of character for her, and it turned out she had some of her own situational things going on. And instead of sort of recognizing that she was triggered, which is not an easy thing to do, right? Because we get into the habit of, I'm the instructor, I'm the one in control of the classroom here, and I'm correct. That's sort of a dangerous position to come from, in my view. But like I said, I mean, I have to tell myself a little bit. I certainly felt a time or two that was a heart-stopping moment for me when I read that, because I thought, oh my gosh, I've had that where students have said to me, I've had a death in the family, and where I'm like, okay, it seems like this was back in the days when I was in the classroom and, giving exams, things like that. And it seemed like, a lot of relatives would pass away around exam time. So it was kind of that almost, not even compassion fatigue. I can't even attribute it to that. It was more like, okay, this again, and it really does impact how I was treating everyone, right? Because immediately the wall would go up, and it didn't leave a lot of room for empathy or compassion for someone who really needed it. And so that particular experience, coming at it from more of a leadership position, I thought, I'm going to tighten my own act up. And that's how I started looking into how subjectivity impacts how, for me at least, how I interact with the students. And it's been many years of so much better in terms of, not that I was horrible to the students in the beginning, but I didn't stop to really think about, am I approaching people with empathy here? And what impact would it have if I did?
I have a story to share that you might find interesting, or it's something to think about. So a long time, I've been teaching here for almost 12 years, been full-time 10 years. So I've had a lot of experience here. And at some point, maybe year 3, 4, I just stopped caring what the excuse was, just gave them the extensions, because it freed me from the judgment. I felt like sometimes maybe I was using different standards for different people. So I was just like, whatever the excuse is, I'm not going to look at your doctor's note. Like, this is what I'm saying to myself. I'm not going to look at your doctor's note. I'm not going to look for evidence of a funeral. It doesn't matter. Like, whatever your situation is, I'm just going to work with you. And that's just the way it's going to be. And what it did was it freed me from having to spend so much time thinking about it. But I wonder if it also kind of freed me to have empathy in other areas, because I didn't have to like go through that mental anguish of like judging and empathizing. And, I feel like it's kind of a universal empathization, I guess, to just say, I'm just going to give it to all of you. But it
Yes.
really did make my life easier ultimately, because most of the time after they gave me their full story, for me to experience the emotions with them, either way, I would give them the extension or whatever anyway. So it was just a way for me. And I wondered, with this whole new policy of the culture of care, if it might do that, if it might free people to not have to like go through that. But at the same time, maybe the empathy is important. So it was just a little thought experiment I was having in my head. Like, is the action more important or the empathy itself? Ultimately they want the extension, right? So maybe the empathy matters, but it's more important that they actually get us to work with them. So anyway, I just thought it was something to think about.
I appreciate that. That's really valuable, Sherry. And that's been my experience too. I felt free. Once I sort of let go of all of that, and I just thought, you know what, I'm not, same thing. I'm not going to look at the doctor's note. You don't even have to tell me the excuse. You can just come to me and tell me you need an extension, right? Or you need a redo because you just had a bad week and you wanted to get your work turned in and it's just not your highest quality. I go with it because I figure it takes a whole lot of courage to approach your instructor and ask for that anyway. And what does it really cost me? And I would do it for everyone. So now I'm not treating people differently. And Marty makes an excellent point too, that he tries to assume that others are going through a lot and we just don't need to pile on. And I think that's a great place to come from, to always assume, to make the assumption that people are being honest. Maybe they're not in a position where they can tell you their deepest, darkest. So they're making some excuse to still ask the ultimate question, or, to get some grace from us. But it doesn't matter. In the end, it's just assume like they came and asked. In this particular case, the student wasn't even asking. She just wanted the late penalty waived because she was having a hard time and she didn't ask for an extension. And it was a game changer for me. So that's why I shared it. Mapi says, from my experience, there are underlying issues that students often don't share. It for sure, how an event exacerbates their symptoms, right? Yeah, there's so much that goes on. And it is hard to be open when you're facing challenges. It's embarrassing. And in an online environment, we don't have that face-to-face. We have to commit everything to writing. So imagine for the students, now they've got to put in writing, the horrible things that are going on in their life. And there is really something about telling someone face to face and reading their empathy in the moment, as opposed to having to write it down. That it's huge. And once I got to that place, it has helped me. Like I said, it's a process. I wish I could say, I got this down and, it's okay with everyone. But, I have situational factors in my own life that some days I'm kind of like, yeah, I'm not feeling it today. So let me step away from the keyboard and take a deep breath and get back at it in a little while. And Vanessa, you're right. Learn and unlearn. It's so true. That's part of the human condition. I love this discussion, you guys. I'll put my email in the chat if anyone wants to continue the discussion.
Dr. Schwartz, you have just given us so much. And what I liked is that throughout your presentation, I found myself pausing and really looking at or thinking about what it looked like in my world. And I just appreciate you walking me through that reflection to see, did I provide grace? Was I an educator, but was I a human? And I think that pause to just really go back and ensure that we are utilizing those practices for the success of our students was necessary. So I really appreciate you being here today. It looks like Dr. Schwartz has shared her email in the chat. And I know I've been with her 2 sessions now, and I have wrote her email down and I'm going to connect with her. So participants, please go ahead and log that down as we wind down the session. Thank you all for being here today. Dr. Schwartz, again, thank you for that moment, just to pause. And, when we know better, we do better. And I just really appreciate the knowledge you shared today and just the excellent session.